welcome to the 905er podcast and the Thursday 905 roundup for this week. And well, we have a bevy, a tripos, we have a bunch, a squad.
You're overusing the thesaurus today.
It's when in doubt, reach for stupid words. Stories really about party politics, actually, but definitely party politics that affects the 905 region, both from the PCs and from the Ontario Liberals. And we're going to start off with the Ontario Liberals, who had a leadership. No, sorry, they didn't have a leadership convention. They had an AGM, their yearly AGM in Hamilton this past weekend. Stuff happened ahead of their leadership vote. And Joel, what's up? What was up over there?
Well, first off, full disclosure, you and I are former card-carrying Liberals. I actually used to work for the party, and I used to actually do the organization for these AGMs, etc. So I am going to maybe slightly don my partisan cap and send a congratulations, I guess, to the poor, thankless staff who had to work. I know for a fact that they had many long hours the week before, getting everything ready, stuffing kits, stuffing minivans, and driving down, and the long sleepless nights during the AGM, making sure everything ran smoothly, which according to all accounts in the media, it did. So kudos to the staff, not the party executive, not the members, but the paid staff who busted their butts. Congratulations to you, one and all. Because
also just throwing in there that back when you were working for them, there were a hell of a lot more staff.
Well, that's the other thing too. Like you guys, whoever the staff were on the ground were doing like 3-4 times the job that I ever did. So tip of the hat to you. But if I would say it was a resounding success because it's top of the headlines in a lot of media. If you're a political junkie in the province of Ontario, this is what you're talking about. Basically, I would argue the Ontario Liberals have finally caught up to the 21st century in this AGM. Big news was that they finally changed their leadership election process, the system, from the very antiquated, the very elitist delegate system to basically it's what they're calling it is a weighted one member, one vote system, which is according to the press release, every constituency association now has 100 points, and every club, young Liberal club around the province and the universities have 50 points, and basically every member of the province, every member of the party gets to vote. Will get to vote for the leadership candidates at a appointed time, and that the popular vote percentage is broken down across the 100 points, and the candidate of the candidates get that percentage. They'll get, if Roland Tanner is running for leadership and he got 20% of the vote in Hamilton Center, well, 20 points goes to Roland Tanner, and they keep doing this until some candidate gets 50% plus one. Reason why, and this is getting quite nerdy, but the reason why is because basically it keeps Toronto from deciding who the leader will be. Toronto is has huge number of Liberals. That's no surprise to anyone listening, but it gives a chance for those Liberal associations with a lot less members to have a say and to have make sure that their concerns and their inputs are listened. And more importantly, what I think is this is key, is it forces the candidates to leave Toronto and go out into the province, into the 905, and into those ridings that are not Liberal centric, but they have to go in there and they have to start talking with people and listen to their views. And what I think this will force is a lot of the Liberal candidates that have been, nobody's been declared yet, nobody's declared, but a lot of the names that are popping up, is they're going to have to go into a lot of blue ridings and a lot of orange ridings and talk with people there, sign up members there, and get the and hear what the concerns are for Ontarians and those of us here in the 905 and beyond in Ontario. I really do think this is a great change for the Ontario Liberals. It's modernized their system, and I think it's got a chance for whomever becomes leader after this to really have, do basically what the NDP were supposed to do with their leadership, and basically go out and talk to people, or find out what people need, what people are worried about, what they want to see in their at Queen's Park, and come up with policy to make change, positive change.
Yeah, I mean, there's an article in the Star today by Martin Regcone saying, actually the title on the website is kind of more in your face than the one in the actual newspaper, and it's like Ontario's Liberals have hit rock bottom, but at least that means the only way is up. Well, I mean, they're claiming that they had more attendees than they've had in the last 20 years. I don't surprises me, but good. And I guess that there's certainly a demand or a need amongst the population for the opposition to get its act together. And so perhaps there is an enthusiasm. Anybody who goes to a AGM like this has to shell out about $500 out of their own pocket.
That's just getting the door. That's just the admission. Never mind your room and board at a hotel or in the travel costs.
It's not a it's a significant undertaking to attend an event like this. So yeah, good, I guess. Like you say, the NDP, again, don't want to seem like we're picking on the NDP, but they did shoot themselves in the foot a bit by not having gone through this process. I'm finding it strange. I mean, Reg Cohen's article is basically saying that Bonnie Crombie of all people has kind of emerged at the AGM as a kind of star, as the person with the star quality who stole the show. And I have to say that, no disrespect whatsoever to Bonnie Crombie, I've been to AGMs where Bonnie Crombie was at before, and there was no particular hoo-ha about it.
Yeah, but the situation has changed drastically. Like people are looking for somebody with some gravitas and have to kind of go against Doug Ford. Bonnie Crombie's been a long time Liberal at the federal level. There is, you and I have said, like, being a mayor in this province is a bit of a thankless job. I mean, you do only have so much power, and it'd be one thing to be, if she runs for leader and she becomes premier of the province, like that's a significantly lot better job than mayor of Mississauga. So I can see her. I can see her interest in checking the waters. But just going back to the NDP point that you made, back when Merritt Stiles was appointed, we do say appointed or anointed, I guess I should say is the better term, as leader of the NDP, we said, like, they missed a huge chance of nobody putting together a leadership race or contestant to go after. I mean, everybody said, oh, she was a shoo-in, but let's look at just the facts here. The Ontario Liberals are coming out of this AGM with great publicity, great press, big momentum. I mean, you've got, even if you don't count Bonnie Crombie on the leadership race, you got Nate Erskine-Smith, Yasser Nakvi, Ted Sue is one that name is being batted around, and a number of other people that are apparently now wading into the waters. They haven't even announced how the race will be held, like what the rules are. And so once that actually kicks off, once we actually have a list of rules set out and candidates declared, and we are off to the races, you're done telling me that nobody's going to be covering the Ontario Liberal leadership race on the front pages of the Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, and going around. I mean, I know you and I've talked it over. We'll probably reach out to a number of the candidates to see if we can get them on for an interview onto this podcast once the rules have been set and we have official declarations. We'll try and reach out and see who we can get on. And we would have done the same for the NDP, and the NDP just shot themselves in the foot. And again, it's like that attitude of just, oh, we're not the opposition or the loyal opposition. It's our turn next, right? To be government. That's how it works, right? We get to, now it's our turn at the next election.
Well, it's that thing of, I made the metaphor a couple of weeks ago that, you know, when someone pitches you a soft fastball down the middle, you know, it's your obligation to try and smack it into the stands. And that was what I felt the Stag and Doe story was, that this was the gift that should keep on giving to all the opposition parties. And I felt that they hadn't taken the opportunity. And Marit Stiles is the person who, above all, needs to take that opportunity, and she doesn't seem to have taken it. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't hang out on the legislature channel watching.
Nobody does.
But nobody does, right? I mean, it's like news gets to me in the same way it gets to everybody else. I remember the day that Doug Ford was chosen as leader. Funnily enough, it was during, I think, a Liberal provincial council, which is like an AGM, but a little bit less so. And I was still involved in the Liberals, and we were coming up to the leader, and we were all crossing our fingers and hoping that it wouldn't be Doug Ford. And of course, it was Doug Ford. And watching the TV screens in the hotel and seeing how he just took over the news agenda from the moment he became leader. Well, actually, from the moment he threw his hat into the ring. That's what we need. Now, part of that is an unfair comparison because big loudmouth idiots seem to get an awful lot of free column inches and metaphorical column inches on television. Doug Ford being one example, Donald Trump being another, Rob Ford being a third. But they get an easier go of it because by the very outrageousness. But it's not an excuse.
It's not an excuse. You're right.
No. You know, she has to. Marit Stiles has to be getting on the front page of newspapers. She needs. I cannot imagine a world in which that story, the Stag and Doe story, had not, you know, what you've got the initial story, and it's like Scout, and it got screwed up by John Tory for whatever reason, whatever the rights and wrongs of it was screwed up by John Tory. The opposition parties need to make sure that stays on the front pages for days and weeks afterwards. You've got to pick away about details. You've got to ask, okay, we demand to see the list of guests. We demand to see, we need to, excuse everybody, I didn't turn my phone off, of course, because I'm a true pro. And you know, by doing that, you create news stories and you keep it in the public eye. And, you know, they haven't done that. They haven't even begun to do that. The story is basically dead already. I don't understand how they could let that.
Well, their first problem was they thought, oh, we'll send it to the integrity commissioner and the integrity commissioner is going to help us out. It's like, no, that's not how it works. The integrity commissioner, you don't use the integrity commissioner until the report comes out. The problem is by the time the report comes out, knowing this government, you're going to have 20 more scandals and this will get lost in the shuffle. My question has always been, right now there's a by-election happening in Hamilton Center. An NDP stronghold if there has ever been one in this province. Why is Marit Stiles not using that as a bully pulpit to go to town on Doug Ford? Why is she not there at the microphone promoting Sarah Jama, who's a candidate there? I see more of Sarah Jama on my social media and in the press than I do of Marit Stiles in Hamilton. And it's
going back to the story of the Stag and Doe thing. It's like when the NDP made a press release they forgot to mention Marit Stiles in the headline or the first line,
Right.
first paragraph of the. It's like the most important thing is it's not NDP says this is a disgrace. It's Marit Stiles says this is a
Yes.
disgrace.
Yes.
Future leader of the province says this is a disgrace. It's like this is amateur hour, guys.
That's it.
Your media people don't know what the hell they're doing.
Well, that's exactly it. Like, but to bring this full circle back to the Liberals, they did this weekend right. They knocked this thing out of the park. They come back and say, we've modernized our system. We are new. We are reinvigorated. They have going into this weekend. They had 3 potential leadership candidates, all milling about looking for a bid, and now they might have a 4th with Bonnie Crombie. Like, that's momentum. That is momentum you cannot buy and you cannot manufacture, and that's momentum that's going to carry over for the next year.
Bonnie Crombie suggests a serious player.
Yeah,
who,
and she doesn't. She has not said no. She has not said no.
She has no reason to risk her current very good job.
Yeah.
By doing this, unless she doesn't think the Liberals are dead in the water, third place party, and sort of heading the same way as they say the Alberta Liberals. But she's looking at them going, okay, this is the actual opposition. This is the party. Now, I'm putting the words into her mouth, but it doesn't speak to a political group that is lacking in confidence that it can come back.
If the Liberals are, as you said, if they are like a dead and done party, a la the Alberta Liberals, as you said, Bonnie Crombie would not have shown up. She would have stayed away as far as possible and kept her head in the sand and just, Liberal who, that would have been the response. You don't go in and make sure somebody like Martin Reg Cohn writes a column about you and get your picture on social media smiling and shaking hands with every Liberal member you can find. And that's not a slam against Bonnie Crombie. That is not. That is somebody who's clearly putting her support behind this party. I'm just saying, everything I've looked at, this isn't a party that is done. I know a lot of people want to write them off as done and toast, and the minivan party, as Doug Ford wants to call them. I am going to say, no, they're not. They're going to see some momentum. Hopefully, get an organization together. And
we're definitely not here to sing the praises of the Ontario Liberals. That's not what we're about. We're probably boringly often repeat our kind of, just so you know, our background is. But we've given them a hell of a lot of stick over the months, and I think we're happy to give any party stick.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
this isn't a party that's dead. It's not a party that has the stench of death around it. Not after this weekend. They may not make full government
at times. There have been times where it's like, I don't know if they can make it back. Things are pretty damn bad. I mean, the whole Del Duca era was just like, my God. And there's something to someone who can attract that star power. I mean, we saw it at the conventions we went to, that certain people would literally have some kind of star power. They would be followed around by crowds if they were present at the I can think of, well, obviously the time Justin Trudeau came to an OLP convention or AGM or whatever it was, it was like, oh my God, it's literal
it's a rock star.
It's kind of rock star stuff, and a whole bunch of people going, I'd have to pay $1,000 to do this if I went to a fundraiser, and I'm getting it free thrown in with my AGM that I only paid $500 for. I mean, there were trying to think of other people now, but I mean, Chrystia Freeland had the same effect at the last leadership election, which is the last Liberal event that I attended. Bob Ray did it when he was, the sort of acting federal Liberal leader. Like he had that kind of like, oh my goodness, Bob Ray's here sort of effect. And if Bonnie Crombie can do that, It does say something, and going back to the kind of Shriner thing, it's like, and it's a point that Reg Cohen makes, and it's definitely one that's crossed my mind too. Is like in that whole kind of strange thing about trying to attract a Shriner, um, as if he was some kind of savior. It's like, well, he's I would absolutely say he's been a very good leader of the Ontario Liberals, coming from a position where there are zero expectations.
You mean the
So he's
Ontario Greens?
outperformed zero very successfully.
You mean the Ontario Greens?
Ontario Greens, sorry,
Yeah.
apologies. And I will say things like the Ontario Greens do a very good job of getting all their media releases to us and certain other parties I could mention. Two of the major parties in this province do not send us anything. And one of them is the one with the red badge, funnily enough. They don't send us their stuff. And I've asked and I've asked. PCs don't send us their stuff either. But of the four parties, the Greens are actually the best at getting their media releases to us. So, kudos on that. However, he doesn't strike me as someone with massive star appeal, if you like, that kind of, oh, wow, Mike Schreiner's in the room sort of thing. Now, is that really what you want as a leader for the province? I don't know, but you need that kind of person to win a leadership election and to get media attention. Doug Ford has it. Love him or loathe him, Doug Ford has the star factor. He has, he's going to be, no pun intended, the biggest person in any room he walks into. Some people can do it. If Bonnie Crombie can do it, well, fair enough. I mean, I think it's an awful long way from here to an actual leadership win, but
you know what?
Who knows?
Well, who knows? We'll keep an eye on this for the next year or so, and we'll see how it goes. Let's take a quick break on that one. We'll come back with more Ontario politicking. And we are back. And switching from red to blue. So this is another kind of interesting. I mean, this is getting really into the policy wonk, but I think this is honestly far more impactful than the Ontario Liberal AGM, and that's basically Doug Ford's campaign finance law that he brought in for the last election that basically really curtailed third party ad spending limits, or just spending limits, but mostly it would have gone into the ads that you would have seen. He basically curtailed it and really limited their spending for a big window prior to an election. And this was aimed at if you remember, folks, the the Working Families Coalition, which was basically the school unions. So the ETFO, Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, and the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association pulled together to, at the time, ads anti-Tory ads during election season, and by default made at that time the ruling Ontario Liberal Party look very, very good. It is no surprise that the Progressive Conservative Party hates the Working Families Coalition with a visceral hatred and wants to see them wiped off the planet. Understandable. But there's this pesky thing called the Charter. And basically the Working Families Coalition took the Ontario government to court, and most recently the Ontario Court of Appeal has struck down the premier or the campaign finance law, basically saying that it violated Section 3 of the Charter and prohibited these unions or any third party from really actively participating in the democratic process, which is good news for working families. It also might be bad news for progressives, because organizations like Ontario Proud is now able to ramp up their efforts as well, because they would categorize as a third party under Ontario election law. So it's good and it's bad news. I mean, it's one of those things, like it
was portrayed in the media to an extent, and by many people on Twitter, or many people of a progressive persuasion on Twitter, and indeed by the comments of the opposition leaders today, as an attack on freedom of speech, particularly aimed at progressives. But I would say for everybody who was thankful not to see the Working Families Coalition guys doing their ads at the last election, there were just as many who were thankful not to see Ontario Proud taking part in the last election. And I don't think it was any bad thing at all that they were both gone. So, I mean, yeah, obviously, protecting people's right to free speech and expression and so on, very important. And the court has said this. And, you know, this government seems to, it's like a bull in a china shop, right? It runs into things, it goes too far, and then it gets overturned. I hope that they've now got a period of time, 6 months or a year or something, to come up with an alternative that will fall within the Constitution. And I hope that they find a way to do it so that there are reasonable constraints on third-party advertising. Because I mean, I've said it before in the episode where we talked about this before, that if I want to hold up the working families guys up against the Ontario Proud people, I say the working families people are closer to some kind of decency and honesty. But the third party advertising at every level in Ontario, municipal and provincial, is the worst. It is shite. It is universally negative. It is universally about distorting an element of truth into an exaggerated and fabricated and fear-mongering thing. And at worst, it's just the kind of borderline racist, prejudiced, flag-waving, fuck Trudeau shit that has since become so prevalent in this country. It's not like, if this is freedom of speech, it's the worst part of freedom of speech. And if third parties can find a way to do positive campaigning, it'd be really nice. I know it's naive of me and it's not going to happen, but I mean, how it's basically operated in the last few decades and how it operated under the Liberals was that the Liberals were able to do basically pretty positive advertising by and large. There wasn't a huge amount from the Liberal government of negative attack ads on the other parties. The other parties might dispute that, but I mean, honestly, I remember a lot of very positive advertising. But partly that was possible because they knew that the attacks would be done by other people, and then there's no conspiracy involved there. They just knew that the reason that the Working Families Coalition existed was to slag off the Tories. And to do the attack ads and do the scary stuff where you put a picture of the opposition leader in black and white and it's all grainy because that makes you think he's a nasty guy. And you do that torn newspaper effect because obviously that's going to change, but it works.
Okay. Well, of course it works because that's usually our Instagram material. So watch it.
But we're not. Well, whatever.
We're not like those guys, not at all. I see your point. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I think this is a double-edged sword. I mean, I don't like laws that strike down or that make it difficult for people to voice their concerns during an election. And I don't think it's wrong for a union to say, well, we're concerned with this party's track record. We don't, I imagine that this upcoming election, we're going to see, all things being equal, you're going to see the teachers unions, QP, as well as SEIU, the union that's in our hospitals, getting involved to protect their vested interests. This government has basically gone to war with a lot of them. There's no trust, I think, on either side of that debate right now. And quite frankly, I'm pretty sure if you're a union member, you want this public union member, I should say, you should want this party out of power. That being said, you're right. It's going to allow like the Ontario Proud to come in with in the era of, you're right, the fuck Trudeau flags. It's not going to be pretty. Is what we're saying. But I kind of want to point out the fact that, bring it back to this government by saying, like, this is another huge loss for this government. Like, this government has not gotten a win in any major policy, any major legislation that they've brought forward. This is a loss for Doug Ford. Doug Ford brought in this third party election financing law prior to the last election because the idea was like, I don't need Ontario proud anymore. I'm in power. I've got my majority. I'll bring it on. I don't need to worry about protecting Ontario proud. They'll go off and they're going to go bash Trudeau at the federal level with their Canada proud nonsense. I don't need to protect him anymore, but I need to hurt the Ontario Working Families Coalition badly. And that's what this was aimed at, which the court said, you're right, it is, and it's unfair. We're overturning it. I don't, this government just acts without thinking. Now, they could bring in on Robert Benzies in the Star points out that in 2021, Ford invoked the charter rights notwithstanding clause to overturn a judge's ruling that the legislation limited election spending. So you could probably do the same thing here, which I mean that's the Ford government in a nutshell, right? I can't do it legally. I can't do it by the books. I can't do it the right way. I can't build a consensus and have the public back my legislation because I don't have any political capital to spend. I mean, you only have 17% of the popular vote behind you going into the, in this, if backing this government. So he can't say I have the political capital to spend on this. So what do you do? Well, use the notwithstanding clause to basically take away evidently charter rights of people to participate in a fair democratic process. That's what I'm concerned about. I mean, we're going to get bad. People will be saying, I think they'll say nonsensical things regardless if there's financing laws in place or not. People will go online and create memes and post half truths, and you're going to get the Chris Skies of the world holding rallies across the province decrying 15-minute city ghettos, just absolute nonsense. And that's where we are. That's where we are. I don't think the fundraising permits is really, I don't think it matters as much as we think it might going forward. What does bother me is the fact that Doug Ford just can't seem to figure out how to govern properly, and he thinks it's a matter of governing by decree. I declare Tuesday to be taco night, and nobody disagree with me. We must all eat. We must all do this because I've said so, and it doesn't work that way, Doug. You need to govern, you need to build consensus, you need to talk to people, and nobody believes what you're saying anymore.
And I think there's the one more positive thing we can throw into the mix, which is that despite Doug Ford's use of the notwithstanding clause to try to protect this legislation, knowing that the courts were likely to strike it down, the courts have struck it down anyway, because it unreasonably impinged people's rights to vote. So there's a win there for the Canadian Constitution as a whole, that even with the ridiculousness of the notwithstanding clause, which is
right.
Even though something tramples on people's freedoms, the provinces can say we want it to be a law anyway. That there still are some checks and balances, at least, that in this case have come into effect and struck down this law. Of course, it may be appealed to the Supreme Court. We don't know yet, or the government may. I hope they do the wise thing, which is to say, well, probably some rewording here will get 80% of what we were aiming for anyway. And maybe that 80% is the better 80% of what they were hoping for.
Well, what they want is the unions to go away. It's ultimately what they want. I mean, like that's what it comes down to. Look at their behavior with QP earlier this year. I don't think they'll use the notwithstanding clause again, because I just think the last time that they used it, the public were so outraged.
Yeah, no, I don't think they could. But they can still go to the court, the Supreme Court, to appeal the Ontario decision.
They could, but I don't. Well, that depends if the Supreme Court wants to hear it. The Supreme Court might say, well, I don't really want to make a ruling for any other province. And I just say that
I
we
couldn't
won't
tell you what the
hear it.
criteria are, but yeah. I mean, I think much. If you want to talk about a much bigger fish to fry in the whole electoral financing thing, I think that's our third story, which is the PCs held a fundraiser a couple of weeks back and raised in a single night in Ontario's Brave New World, where there are no corporate and no union donations. They filled a room with corporate and union representatives and raised $6 million.
Well, it
Funny
was
that, isn't it?
well, tickets were $1,500 a piece. And I'm sorry, but I don't buy for a second that every ticket purchase was strictly out of pocket. But here's the thing: if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you are not somebody who's got $1,500 sitting in your back pocket that you can go buy a ticket to sit at the table and hopefully catch the ear of a minister or perhaps the premier at a dinner table. I used to kind of bring this full circle. Back in the day, I used to work for the Liberals. We used to do this as well. They used to pack the convention center in Toronto with the richest of Bay Street, buying tables and 1,500. Well, I think then it was $1,100 tables because that was the limit, or $1,100 seats, I should say, and that was a big thing. The fact is, the money is still the factor here. Like it's just it's grotesque. $6 million in one night, all to the Tories. I mean, good for them, but not really. I mean, they just up the limit that you can donate, so that's why they're getting these huge numbers.
Well,
But
it brings us full circle in another way too, because it brings us back to Martin Reg Cohen, who's a great journalist, one of the best journalists in the province, working on political stuff. However, I mean, he almost single-handedly kind of kicked off and drove the campaign. No, he didn't lead a campaign, but his articles about campaign finance and party finance and the problems with corporate and union donations very much drove the Wynne government in a somewhat panicky way to bring in a really very sweeping funding reforms that completely ended corporate and union donations, and further than that, banned MPPs from even attending the fundraisers that were held, so that there could be no suspicion of cash for access and this kind of thing. So as a party, as a member of the party faithful, you're in this bizarre situation of having a fundraiser where the people who usually are the focus, or the big reason for coming, get to meet a minister or whatever, are not there. And it's like, well, come to meet nobody, a whole bunch of volunteers from the Ontario Liberal Riding Association. Woohoo! Will you pay $500? No.
well, that's the thing.
So I mean, that was weird. But I mean, at least they were honoring the intent of their own legislation, which is to take, and because I think there were people within the party leadership, who truly believed that the corporate donation situation was indefensible. Well, when the government changed, overnight they decided to reinterpret the legislation that the Liberals have brought in with a much more favorable interpretation of what MPs could do. But it is still illegal for corporations and unions to donate. So why is it that the PCs are currently coining it in vast amounts of money that is clearly, one way or another, coming from corporate and union sources? This is a bigger scandal than far bigger scandal than what Martin Reg Cohen originally wrote about. I'd really like to see some articles from him exploring this current situation. It seems to me, no, obviously the parties are like, well, we just say it has to come from a personal check, and the checks do come from personal checks. But at that point, what happens next? Does that person claim that check back from
Well,
I swear to God, this money is not all coming
here's
from private pockets. I promise you that.
probably not. But here's the other thing: you've got um, like the billionaire development industry, among other industries, that like the top people there, they aren't you and me who say, well, $200 I could go talk with the minister about, my personal pet peeve or my personal concern. um no, like these are people who are kind of expected to spend that money. They have the money to spend. Like this is not a dent in their pocket at all to attend this thing. They're there to and they're there because they have to show up on the list, otherwise they don't get favors from this government. Like this government would probably look at that donor list and be like, well, who attended, who did it, who's from this um consulting firm, who's from this business, who's from this donor. Well, you don't get put on the callback list when we put out a tender for a new government project. Your name somehow gets left off the tiered list, no matter what the bid is. That's why they go to these things. There was a couple of weeks ago, you and I were talking about this just offhanded, and I thought you had a really good idea where, I mean, this is all tax refundable, right? Like you put this on your tax deduction and you get a percentage of it reimbursed on your taxes every year. And wouldn't it make more sense? I thought this was great to say, maybe we look into a rounded figure. Maybe you just say everybody in the province, you're allotted to give up to $1,000. And you can divide that up into however you want, whichever party you want, as many parties as you want. If you want to give 200 to the Liberals, 2 to the NDP, 200 to the PCs, so be it. 200 to the Green, round it out, and that's it. But every time you fill out your taxes every year, you fill out your on your taxes, and the government just hands out that amount to the parties directly.
It's actually it's the complete reverse of the, every so often there's the Tax Federation of Ontario or whatever says, shock horror, parties are subsidized by taxpayer dollars. Horror, the horror, the horror. And then they suggest getting rid of that subsidy, as if that would make any bloody difference to the cleanness or fairness of politics. It doesn't. There's actually no way in which people can donate to parties that I think can ever be properly clean and free of that kind of influence and quid pro quo that you talked about. Mm-hmm. In all honesty, no one's donating $1,500 if they don't think they're getting something back from it. And that was true under the Liberals. It was true, I'm sure, when the NDP were the Ontario government. It's true whoever's in power. It's not a direct. I'm not suggesting wrongdoing necessarily. I'm just saying that when you donate, you're supporting a cause, yes, but just even there's no such thing as a fully altruistic action. It's kind of cliche that we do. Even if you help the old lady across the road, we're doing it because it makes our ego feel good or whatever. You cannot have a truly clean form of donation to political parties that doesn't at least create the impression that there is a possibility for corruption. The only way to do it is through you 100% subsidize the parties. And one way to do that, it wouldn't have to be like, a maximum of $1,000. You could just say everybody in the province has to pay $10 a year out of their tax. $10 will go to the political parties. And you can say, I want to give $5 to the PCs, I want to give $4 to the Liberals, and I want to give $1 to the NDP, or I want to give $10 to the NDP and $0 to the other buggers, or I want to give it all to the communists or whatever. I mean, there would have to be some kind of checks and balance on that. I mean, even that would have problems. I'm not saying that wouldn't have problems too, but a small amount coming from every person in the province would put a massive motivation on the parties every year to be doing things that every voter wants, rather than right now.
But
everything that this PC government does is aimed at its major donors, who are the developers. you've
But my,
seen that its entire agenda is based around its fund, where it's getting its money from, and that is primarily big business and above all the development industry.
yeah,
They are a party that works for that. If they got zero from the development industry, but they got all their money from some kind of uh, basically,
yeah, but my point, my point that I think about, I like the tax subsidy part is that you just have to be able to allow people to say, no, I don't want to give any of my money to any of the political parties, because they should, you should have a right to say, no, I don't want to go to any of them.
I think the problem with that is that it would undermine the whole thing, and then it wouldn't work.
But
But
no,
yeah,
but
I mean,
no,
I
but
get the
you have to have
principle, but
you have to have a right to say, I don't. People have a right not to vote, right? You don't have to say, I don't want to give money to any of
well,
the
I
political
think
parties.
voting should be compulsory. Firstly, even if you just go into the thing to say none of the above.
That's well, maybe so, but that's a whole other.
Yeah.
You have to have a right to say, you have to have a right to be able to say to the political parties, I don't like what any of you are offering me. Pox on all your houses. But
I mean,
that's
right now
we're getting but we're
right
getting
this
off.
moment we all already pay part of our taxes to support the Ontario and the
Yeah,
federal parties. We're already doing it. It's nothing new. We'd just be
I understand that.
restructuring it.
But I'm just saying, I think it would be interesting. Anyway, but the point is just to remove that. Honestly, it's to end the fundraiser event. The idea of like the small gathering where you get to go and hobnob with the minister of municipal affairs or a minister of health, a minister of whatever. And the idea is like, well, I can go and lobby them for X, Y, and Z for my business or my interests. Um, that's what we want to end. We want to end like these big convention center fundraising gigs, those convention hall fundraising gigs, those stag and doe things, and say like if if you want to talk to the government about an issue, your business, a cause, whatever, you do it through proper lobbying channels. You book a date and time. You say, I'm meeting with Mr. So and so at this time to talk about X, Y, and Z. And that way the public knows exactly who's meeting, who's talking with our elected officials, and who's trying to influence policy. Because that's what this comes down to, is this, and that's where the political financing is about. It's the rest of us bitching in the wind about why are hospitals underfunded? Why do our schools why are our schools locked down or not getting enough funding? Why do our schools not have the right HEPA filters during a pandemic? Meanwhile, those who have the power, the billionaires, the massive corporate interests, are able to buy $1,500 without batting an eye, and they get the ear of the power wielders in this province. It's not right. It wasn't right when the Liberals did it. It's not right when the Tories do it now. We need to find a new way of financing political parties and making sure that they're accountable to us, the taxpayer, the citizen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mistake was in thinking that if you took out corporate and union donations, it would clean up politics somehow, and it's actually made it much dirtier because the money is still being donated. It's just that now we don't know where it's coming from or who it's tied to.
Right.
Um, because it may be donated by the secretary of a company who's getting it back from somewhere. So you've just thrown away the traceability. At least you knew how much Pfizer was donating, or Labatt's, or whoever.
Like Labatt, yeah, you don't have a table of Labatt executives and they're all sitting there. Oh, I believe wholeheartedly in this. I'm going to fork out $1,500 for a table, or we'll all pitch in for $10,000 a table. Whatever the funding scheme is. You're right. They're not. There's no way everybody at that table is that much of a supporter.
No.
Of that political party.
The thing is, ultimately, I mean, the mistake we make, corporate donations problematic, but ultimately, the $10 donated by a little old lady who feels strongly about, I don't know, any subject, it's just as potentially dirty as $1,000 donation or a $1,500 donation from a developer. They're all, like, people join political parties all the time because they're hoping it will help their career. That's a perfectly valid reason to join, but it's potentially, it's open to interpretation as well. Aren't you just trying to find a way to get unfair influence? If you start looking at this stuff at every corner, there's a potential way to interpret things as dirty, even when they're not. And very often it's very much in the eye of the beholder. But if you, I don't see any way in which party funding can ever be clean if the parties know who the money comes from. And if you said, well, it's coming from anonymized from the public, and the public has decided how much they're going to give, or they're going to give the parties, or it's some kind of, you could come up with some kind of formula that ties it to the per vote subsidy.
I think we're getting too much in the weeds.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, there are ways and means of doing this that would make it fairer, and which would give an incentive to the parties to prioritize the public's interests. So
why don't we leave it on that for this week? Thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back next week with more of 905er. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.